Let me give you a brief overview, beginning to my immediate right of Coach, I'm going to call you Coach P. This would be Representative Rene Plasencia, who is from Orlando. He represents the 49th District, and he was elected to the House in 2014 and is concluding his first term as a member of the State House. I will mention parenthetically, he will be on the ballot again this year. That would be both on August the 30th, which is coming up shortly, as well as on the November ballot, and we're looking forward to having you back in Tallahassee, Coach. The past term, Representative Plasencia has served as a member of the committees on, or subcommittees on business and professional regulation, higher education, workforce and economic affairs, and health quality. We had a lot of health-related issues, health insurance-related issues. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. He is a teacher, and he is a graduate of the University of Central Florida. To his right, we're going to talk about the University of Central Florida some too, so be ready for that. To his right, and in the center of the table, this is Senator David Simmons from Altamont Springs. Senator Simmons represents currently the 10th District. He was elected to the Florida House in 2000. He served until 2008, and he returned to the Florida Senate in 2010 and has been subsequently reelected. David will not be on the ballot this year because he has been reelected to the 9th District with no opposition. We've renumbered districts because of reapportionment. In the past term, David has served as members of the committees on appropriations, environmental preservation and conservation, banking and insurance, higher education, judiciary, education appropriations, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and he has chaired the powerful Senate Rules Committee that controls all of the business that is considered by the body. David is a graduate of Tennessee Tech, first in his class, I know that. And also has his law degree from Vanderbilt Law School. He is an attorney that practices here, and he practices here in Orlando, and he is the financial managing partner of his firm. And to David's right, and at the far end of the table, Representative Mike Miller. Mike is from Winter Park. He represents the 47th District here in Central Florida, and he was also elected to the House in 2014 and is concluding his first term in office as well. Mike will be on the ballot again this year, but you are not on the August ballot. We're looking for your name in November, and we expect to see you back in Tallahassee as well. Mike has been a member of the committees or subcommittees on justice appropriations, health quality, education K-12, transportation and ports and regulatory affairs. He is a business consultant. He is a graduate of the University of Florida, and he has his master's degree from Rollins. So with that thought in mind, welcome our guests for me. We'll get to some comments here. Big session this year, and there are things that invariably stand out in each individual session. Senator Simmons, this has been really the year of water, and I know that was the first major policy issue that passed this year. It was the first bill that was signed by the governor, and you had been working on this for a couple of decades. At least 3 years on the specific piece of legislation. And I want to start with Senate Bill 512 by Senator Dean. Tell us a little bit about what the whole, we've rewritten 3 generations of water policy here in Florida. What's the bill going to do for us?
Well, when I started on this with Senator Dean and various of the other senators, what happened in the summer of 2013 was the knowledge that we were in a basically a failure to deal between the agricultural interests, business interests, and the environmental interests, and there was a tremendous amount of distrust between all of these various interests. And we began with the precept that there needs to be a comprehensive plan for water conservation, preservation, and the assurance that 20 years from now we're going to have a state that, because its need to its existence is based upon water, that we have something that will assure that we will preserve our springs, preserve our aquifer. 95% of the water that we drink anywhere north of Orlando area is coming from the aquifer. The Biscayne Aquifer in South Florida, the need to put a plan together. And we did put a plan together, and the bill assures that basically there's a 20-year plan, knowing that we can't solve a lot of the problems that exist relating to water preservation and conservation and purification here in the state unless we have a plan, and we have the assurance that each of the local governments will meet with and work with the local water management districts as well as the DEP, and the result is that there will be plans that are put together with the input of the local governments. We're going to deal with the issue of putting together plans that will assure that we will deal with, number one, the issue of discharge by local governments, which is a major problem. The issue of discharge by septic tanks. And what's happened is this plan was passed, and I believe that what's going to happen is that we've made monumental progress on that issue.
Let me do a quick follow-up on that, because I know there was an implementing bill that followed by Senator Negron and Representative Harrell that will provide a funding mechanism of somewhere in the neighborhood north of $300 million annually to be spent by the legislature. Some of that coming back to Central Florida this year, and can we look forward to it in future sessions from the legislature? And if I guess.
And the answer is, under Legacy Florida, what's happened is that we've allocated approximately $200 million for the Lake Okeechobee Everglades cleanup because of the problems relating to the east, the St. Lucie River and estuary, and to the west, Caloosahatchee and its estuary. We're dealing with $50 million a year that is dedicated to springs cleanup, which is something that I pushed very hard for, and also $5 million a year for approximately either 5 or 10 years for the Lake Apopka. But good funding, excellent funding for that, but something that I think is going to make a big difference.
I want to stay with Central Florida and some good things. Coach, I had indicated that you were a graduate of UCF, and I guess we're bringing some of the infrastructure to the downtown. Tell us a little bit about that and what the legislature did in that regard.
Sure. It's interesting. Every year I have, or the 2 years that I've been in office, I've met with the governor before session and after session, and I always think to myself, if I have one thing I want to ask the governor, just a priority of mine, to keep it simple, make sure it's only one so that he remembers and understands that this is the priority that I have for my district. And both years it was UCF's downtown campus. I knew it was a big game changer, not just for the University of Central Florida, but all of Central Florida and downtown Orlando. Essentially what we have is a $20 million investment from the legislature, but it's also based on whether or not UCF also gets $20 million in money that's internally generated from their own budget, and also money that they collect from philanthropic sources as well. So it's a $60 million project. It's phase one, so there's more than one phase. This is just the beginning. Their phase one is going to be one building, possibly one building and a smaller second building as well. But the incredible thing about it is this is a one-of-a-kind downtown campus. It's not like what you would find in Phoenix with the university, with Arizona State, because it's a partnership between not just the university and the state college, because it's Valencia College and it's University of Central Florida, but it's also a partnership with Orange County Public Schools. We're going to have students are going to be going to K through 8 school. It's going to be a community school, very much like what we have at Evans High School. The students there's been a partnership with Harris Rosen, so the students in that community, which is Paramore, if they graduate through that program, go to Jones or Evans, graduate from there, and are accepted into a state university, then their tuition is covered by Harris Rosen's scholarship. In addition to that, the University of Central Florida also said that if any student that goes through the K through 8 graduates from the University of Central Florida and gets admitted into the medical school, will go to medical school for free. This is a game changer for the entire region when you're taking a look at the downtown area, but more importantly, when you're taking a look at the community of Paramore and what we can do as far as providing the best education for the kids of that community and giving them the hope that if they do work hard, that money is not an obstacle for them to pursue higher education. So look in the coming years as they start construction over at the downtown campus for them to come back to us and maybe ask for more money for later phases as well.
Mike, I want to stay in the Central Florida area a little bit. You and Senator Simmons were companion sponsors of revisions to the Central Florida Expressway Authority authorizing legislation. Tell us what that was about and what we can look for in changes there.
Well, first of all, thank you. I know this was originally scheduled for the week that we had the tragedy in my district. Actually, it's right across the Pulse is right down the street from my office. So it was a tough time for all of us in Orlando, and I appreciate you guys rescheduling and allowing us to come back. We learned a lot about from that tragedy we can talk about later. But what I learned about the legislature is mostly from Senator Simmons. So a lot of the bills I've run, actually most of the fun things I've had a chance to do is because Senator Simmons has been a great companion on the Senate side. In particular, I actually inherited what had already been some very good work done by former Representative Nelson and our colleague Mike LaRosa that had worked with Senator Simmons to just kind of reorganize the Central Florida Expressway Authority so there's no temptation there for wrongdoing. Not that there was, but just the perception was that there may have been some challenges there to have a clean and well-run expressway. So we just codified that in law, and this year's opportunity was to just clarify some of those pieces. And one of the big pieces was to amend the agreement so that when we pay off the expressway, the actual expressway itself will get to own it. So it's actually we're investing in something for the long-term good of Central Florida, and it was a very good process to work with Senator Simmons, who showed me the way. So thank you, Senator.
Well, David, let me come back to you. There was one piece of legislation that was you supported. Actually, I think everybody at the table voted for it, that Representative Benaquisto was the lead sponsor of. And Sunday night, it was on 60 Minutes, dealing with some problems or issues that we had with major insurers, I think all but one throughout the country. I guess it was a repeat Sunday, so if you were watching the Olympics, you might have seen it earlier. But in any case, tell us a little bit about that piece of legislation, that I think is Senate Bill 966.
Yes, Pete, that dealt with the issue of insurance companies, life insurance companies having proceeds that they had available. Many of them also may have had annuities that were available. They knew how to stop paying on annuities, but they certainly didn't know how to find the same people or the same beneficiaries with respect to life insurance proceeds. And this bill simply requires that insurers make the diligent effort to find the beneficiaries and reach out to the beneficiaries to assure that they're not holding these billions of dollars that they did. And so it's a consumer, very pro-consumer type of legislation.
Rene, I mentioned in your introduction that you were very involved in some of the healthcare initiatives that passed this year. Let me ask you first about, you were the prime sponsor of the Dental Care Health Access Initiative. Tell us a little bit about that. What's that mean here locally for all of us?
Sure. So back in 2011, the legislature back then put into law the Medicaid managed care program that we currently have in our state. When they did that, there were different ways in which certain services could be billed through Medicaid. Dental hygiene was excluded from being billed through Medicaid at federally qualified health clinics. And so we have a lot of children, so this bill gives access to anyone age 21 or younger who has Medicaid to go to a federally qualified health clinic or community center. And if there's a dental hygienist there who can provide certain services, well, then they can go seek those services. The problem was that there was no way for those dental hygienists to get reimbursed through Medicaid because we cannot directly reimburse a dental hygienist. You can only reimburse a dentist. So what we did this past year is we made it so that federally qualified health clinics or community centers could reimburse, could get reimbursed, and they in turn could reimburse the dental hygienist. But we have a big problem with dental hygiene and dentistry in general, especially for our lower socioeconomic communities. And when you take into account the amount of days of schools that are missed by children who have serious dental problems that could have been prevented, you're furthering the setback of a lot of these kids to get out of the generational poverty that they were born into.
Mike, we got a lot of airports around here, some of them pretty good size, and you had a very interesting piece of legislation this year that amended Florida's airport zoning law of 1945.
Yes, I did.
I think that has something to do with development and redevelopment, things like that. Explain to us what that's going to do in the area, what it means to the area.
Well, the bill itself, obviously self-explanatory. In 1945, I think most people put airports wherever they wanted, and so now that the population is 20 million, a lot of these airports are now surrounded by communities, and in some cases are quite urban. I have two airports, one right outside my district, OIA, and then I have Orlando Executive right in the middle of my district. The interesting thing about the bill is I'm going to tell you a little story about it because it's actually fun legislative process.
I think there's something about garbage here too. I want you to touch on that too.
I'll just tell you because actually for me other than the things that Senator Simmons taught me, the biggest thing I learned about bills often become trains, and this is one of those bills that when it got former Representative Dunbar knows exactly what I'm talking about. This bill ended up becoming one of those bills that was languishing on the docket, and we hadn't gotten it to the floor. And another senator, not Senator Simmons, had decided he was going to do some changes to the bill. And actually, I didn't really understand what he was doing because I was a freshman. But he did what they did. He did a title amendment change, and he changed the bill to a growth management bill. So then everything jumped on there, and I had lost control of the bill. So when it got to game day, and I looked at my desk, it said postponed. The speaker had written on himself, postpone the bill. So I was kind of disappointed. It was one of the very few bills I had up that's this last session. So I went to him and I said, Speaker Christofoli, what's going on? He said, there's just too much stuff going on with this bill. We'll have to resolve it later, which usually means we'll run out the clock. But fortunately, the senator and some other folks that really wanted some of this growth management stuff had put it on another bill. So I looked up and I saw all the stuff on the other bill, and I said, oh, well, there they go. They've got it somewhere else. So I went over to the bill sponsor. I said, I see you just ran the bill through on another amendment. Can I take all this stuff off and go back to the airport zoning law of 1945, which in effect will protect a lot of the homeowners and other entities around airports from because the FAA and a lot of other organizations are looking to try to make sure that airports are safe. We've had a couple incidents up in Sanford and around the country, and we want to make sure that the airports and residential and urban communities can coexist. The sponsor said no. I'm not going to take the stuff off. And I said, well, you ran it through another thing. So I went to the speaker. I said, Mr. Speaker, can I take this stuff off this bill? Speaker said, there's no way. We're going to have to make a bunch of deals. It's the 11th hour. We're about to get out of here. Don't do it. And I said, please, 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 I got a deal for you. And he said, what's the deal? I said, I can go to the Democrat leader right now, Mark Pafford, a good guy in West Palm Beach, and I can guarantee you he'll say yes to this bill. And that's because Donald Trump had bought some property at the end of the West Palm Beach airport. So he didn't know that I knew that, but I knew that. And that was not the reason for the bill. But so I walked up to the minority leader and I said, Mark, will you let me run this bill without all the other amendments on it? And he said, are we messing with Trump right now? And I said, well, yes, we are. And he said, okay, well, then let's do it. So they called a recess. We took the bill down. We cleaned it all up. Everybody in the chamber was wondering what the heck was going on. We came back up. The speaker says, Representative Miller, you're recognized to present your bill. And I said, well, we've been talking about it for 15 minutes, and that's all I want to say. And we passed it 112-0. So Mr. Trump may not be happy with me, but the airport zoning law will make it a lot easier for airports and communities to coexist. And that's my story.
And you're sticking to it. I like, that was good. Actually, this inside baseball and making a bunch of deals, that's a good segue to Senator Simmons, since he's in charge of all the deal making in the Senate as the Rules Chairman. And my question more generally is, in 15, we watched houses adjourn at different times, lots of discontent, lots of you mentioned Representative Pafford and the fact that you were able to come together. Republicans and Democrats didn't come together so well in 15, and when you finally got stuff done, then the governor had a pretty heavy veto pen. Contrast that to this year where everything went I think, very smoothly. And David, my question is, why did it happen? And the budget, which is at the heart of all of this, do we meet the state's needs with it? And maybe look a little bit into next session, and can we sort of preserve that civility that we saw come together? I guess we thank you for that, should I say? But anyway, tell us the story.
Sure. What happened is that after 2015, remember we had a significant disagreement between the House and the Senate, and also included the governor with respect to health care expansion. Whether you want to call it Medicaid expansion or not, from the Senate's point of view, it was health care expansion because we were going to do our own alternative here in the state of Florida and take down the federal funds of approximately $53 to $55 billion to expand health care. And unfortunately, there was some acrimony that was created in the discussions, and we didn't get things done as much as we wanted to in 2015. We adjourned, as Pete has said, without passing a budget, had to come back, and but we learn. We learn from our mistakes, and the fact of it is that as I met with the governor on multiple occasions, and I pointed out to him, said, you can't get to the policy if you can't get past the personalities, and he agreed with me, and we somewhat made an arrangement that if there was anyone, at least in the Senate, who wanted to say something that was, let's say, derogatory in some way, as some people were doing in 2015 towards either the governor or the speaker or anyone in the House, that what we would do is I would go ahead and I would ask them, particularly a senator, to if you got a problem, go talk to the governor directly, and I'll make arrangement for you to get down there today in order to let you say it to his face. And the fact of it is, it's much more difficult to stand there or sit in the executive office with the governor and say things that you might want to say out in the public, in the rotunda, or to the press. And the end result is that there were instances in which certain senators did end up going down and taking me up on the offer, and went down and to the great what I would call tribute to the governor and his ability and wanting to work with the legislature. You'll notice that the acrimony and the distrust dissipated. In fact, what happened is Republicans worked much better with Democrats, Democrats with Republicans. Respect was renewed, and people were able to get past the personalities so they could get to the policy. And we passed some excellent legislation. As a matter of fact, you've seen after the session that the press uniformly said that this was a successful, and some acknowledging very successful, session. We passed things that were important for the state of Florida, whether it's for children, young people with disabilities, tremendous legislation for that, tremendous legislation for water and the preservation of water. Matter of fact, legislation for housing assistance for homelessness. The fact of it is that local areas here in Central Florida hit a home run, and Pete's talking about funding. There were a lot of things to the benefit of Central Florida that the governor left in the budget. As a matter of fact, most everything. Why? Because we were working together to get a common goal for the betterment of Florida. And Central Florida hit a home run on this, and I can tell you, you've heard the remarks by Representative Miller and Representative Plasencia. The fact of it is they have done a phenomenal job as representatives here in Central Florida, working with the senators, President Gardner. I mean, as the president of, Senator Gardner, as the president of the Senate for the past 2 years, has created a legacy that is unbelievable for Central Florida and for all of Floridians. And I can't knowing that we did have such a success, I can't do this without saying that, Pete, you've done a wonderful job. I mean, you're talking about effective work on behalf of your clients and the state of Florida. Pete, Martha, Carrie Roth, I mean, just an effective team of advocates that have done a wonderful job.
None of these questions have to do with my clients, though, yet. I'm getting there.
I know that,
Okay,
but
all right, there we go.
let me tell you, they've done a great job. They're
Thank you, Dave.
highly
Yeah,
respected
on behalf of all three
in
of us, thank
Tallahassee.
you for that. That's very nice.
I just want to add
Are
real
you
quick.
piling on? Is that what
Well,
we're
no,
doing?
no, I'm not. Well, you guys do a great job. Don't worry. But I'm talking about the circumstance that Senator Simmons just alluded to, and that is the second year. One of the things I was, as a freshman, I think I can speak for Rene. We were a little bewildered by the whole circumstance that first year because it was, there's a lot of, high level.
It was a
conversation.
first of its kind in
And
the
it
way
was,
it happened. Trust me
so
on that.
Yeah,
there-
so
there
we were all. I mean, Rene and I sit next to each other on the floor, and a lot of times we're like, "What is going on today?" I mean, it was so. I think when we came back the second year, and President Gardner and Speaker Crisafulli really looked at what they cared about, the wonderful legislation they both passed with water, and then with the now the Gardner scholarships and all things he did for children and people with disabilities was fantastic. So it set the tone for a fantastic legislative session right from that moment. You could tell after the first week that we weren't going to fight. And then I was kind of scared to go over and visit with Senator Simmons because you didn't want to go to the other side because everybody was so tense. But then we would have real conversations and go back and forth to each other's chambers. And it was really, that was what inspired me actually to say I would actually like to continue to do this, because after the first year I was thinking maybe I made a mistake. So, but I just want everybody to know that I think that, we did learn from our mistakes that first year. And I think especially what Senator Simmons said, we realized that it doesn't do anybody any good to look backwards. We need to look forward and start looking at what we can do to make Florida a better place, because we're competing with 49 other states. So we did it.
Rene, I want to come back and do a follow-up question on one of your bills, and actually to both you and Mike. For freshmen to be passing legislation is pretty unusual, and both of you had a pretty good inventory of things you were able to get done. Part of what the budget does on an annual basis is provide incremental funding around, and I think that you had a piece of legislation that dealt with a pilot program that's actually going to begin in Dade County, and you were part of the sponsor of the implementing language. Tell us a little bit about the pilot program and what we expect from that.
So it's a needle exchange program that they're starting. It's a pilot program out of the University of Miami. And the amount of money that saves, so if you take into account, first of all, we're starting to see a resurgence in HIV and AIDS here in the state of Florida and nationwide. I think it's a lack of education for one, and it's also an investment that we have to make as municipalities, as states, and as a country in making sure that that there's an environment that's not conducive to the spread of HIV or AIDS or any other disease. But it's a lot cheaper to do a needle exchange program than it is to incur the cost of someone who is going through HIV or AIDS for the long term. And so we passed into law, which was, I think, a great thing between the Senate and the House, a needle exchange pilot program for Miami-Dade County. But having said that, as soon as we passed that into law, I went to the doctor out of Miami-Dade County who was the one that was behind this bill, and I asked him if there's anything we can do to have satellites of this bill or of this program in other parts of the state. And he said, actually, there is, within the language of the bill, there is some wiggle room where we might be able to have some satellite programs all over the state. We'd have to work with your university, with some of the hospitals, but we're actively pursuing trying to have some of that needle exchange program come here to Central Florida as well.
I want to begin to, and it's sort of a warning for everybody there, if you think you might have questions, I'd like to do a few more looking sort of to the future, but then hopefully preserve some time for you to ask questions. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. You and I have had some discussions about this. I know that in 2008, we had the Save Our Homes Amendment, and with it, some protections for increases on ad valorem property taxes for commercial property, so that it would be capped by 10% in any given year. And that began in 2008. But the commercial cap will go away in 2018 unless the next legislature returns that to the ballot for approval. And I suspect that in the audience today we have a lot of people who care about non-residential commercial property. I looked at one of the downtown hotels here in Orlando and noticed that if the cap expires without being reenacted, the annual ad valorem tax will increase immediately by $164,000 a year. Tell us, are you all looking ahead to that? Something that you think that the legislature is going to give the voters a chance to look at again?
Well, first of all, yeah, that was actually a fascinating conversation because I had just, we were talking about all the legislation that I had done in the last legislative session, and you said heads up, and I said, oh my gosh, that is actually a shocking number when you mentioned that hotel and looking at, we had talked about in the last legislative, well, let me just back up. The legislature itself never wants to raise taxes. We are a Republican-led legislature that's trying to give as much money back to the taxpayer as we possibly can, and this would be the polar opposite of that. So I am very confident when I can't speak for the Senate, but I know in the House we will make sure.
I'm going to ask him the question next, so I'm going to let David speak for himself.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, and if it comes to it, I'd be the one to sponsor the bill to make sure we don't let that happen, because I think it's just not. We're trying to create a business-friendly environment. That's what the governor says. We've been in line with the governor on that. We've been constantly communicating on how to make this the most competitive state in the United States, and that would set us back.
Coach P, before I recognize the Senate, you all in with Mike on getting this done?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to incur any increase in cost to any of our small businesses or large businesses. I think it's what makes our state the #1 destination for jobs in this country, and so we want to make sure that we keep that pro-business job climate strong here in our state. So absolutely.
David, we're going to hear about it in the Senate, I assume, yes, but
I can assure you.
Are you going to sponsor it? Maybe that I should have asked it that way.
I tell you that anything that is pro-business and pro-consumer and it results in the state of Florida being the most efficient and the best place to live in the nation, we're going to do it. And let me explain to everyone about what's happened with respect to your legislature and your governor, and that is that when you look at things the way we have a view, which is how other states are doing things, the state of Florida, people vote with their feet. They go to where is the best place to live. We have a net of approximately 350 to 360,000 people moving to the state of Florida every year. And the reason they move here is not because it's a bad place to live. It's because it's one of the best places to live. That's the reason that now Florida is the third largest population-wise state in the nation. What kind of problems that we have? The kind of problems we have are good problems. They're success problems, dealing with growth, dealing with people wanting to live here. And of course, we have to deal with that in a way that is not raising taxes, increasing efficiency of government, and of course, making sure that what we have is the kind of quality environment that is the kind of environment that people want to live here, with an education system that is truly one of the best in the nation. So the answer to that is that we're going to do everything that is going to be low taxes and efficiency in government.
Well, you gave me a good segue to Rene, because wanting to live here, looking after our folks and things like that, one of the bills that you sponsored that actually passed, I think, in one of the implementing bills was the Florida Kid Care Program. And tell us a little bit about what that's designed to accomplish.
So currently, before in the Florida Kid Care Program, we had a waiting list of about 5,000 or so children who were born here but whose parents were undocumented, and they weren't eligible for kid care. They were put on a waiting list. And this past year, we eliminated that waiting list, and we added all of the children, every single one of them, onto Florida Kid Care, which is an incredible thing for us to do. These are children who need help and were born here in the United States but happen to have parents who are undocumented.
Mike, I want this sort of looking forward a little bit. One of the things that this year's legislature did is you have given the choice to all of us on August the 30th to vote on a proposed constitutional amendment dealing with solar energy. Tell us a little bit about what we will see on the ballot, or what that's designed to do in a couple of weeks, and should we vote for it or vote against it?
Well, I don't think
Obviously,
we.
you voted for it, so we should vote
I
for it
was
too.
looking on my phone when we were getting ready to do this. I was trying to find the vote to see what if anybody opposed it in the legislature. So, and at least on our side, I think it passed pretty overwhelmingly in the Senate too, right, Senator? So, I mean, I have the yes, of course you should vote for it because we said we're trying to save you again. Back to the tax situation, we're trying to save your ad valorem tax monies for. So what it does is exempts the assessed value of renewable energy source device from ad valorem tax on tangible personal property. And it goes into where it is in the statute. It prohibits a property appraiser from considering the installation of a renewable energy source device in the determination of assessed value of real property for the purpose of ad valorem taxation. So we're trying to lower your taxes, encourage you to use solar power. We are the Sunshine State.
That sounds reasonable to me. I will make this observation just for everyone's benefit. There actually are two different solar energy related constitutional amendments. The first one is the one that Mike just shared with us that was presented to the voters by the legislature, will be implemented by general law. There's a second one that will appear on the ballot in the November general election. I was reading yesterday that a couple of the power companies have put about $12 million behind that, so I'm sure there'll be lots of TV advertising for you to see on that one. And I don't know if they're fully competing or not, but the one I would agree with Mike, I think that universally the support for the one on the August 30th ballot's a pretty good idea. David, I want to ask you this question. There was something that the House did, which was to offer a proposed constitutional amendment to put term limits on Florida's appellate judges. That's a pretty radical change to our judicial system, and the Senate didn't consider it. So if it one, I'd like your thoughts on it. Two, if it's back, do you think the Senate would consider it a second time?
Again, this is something that needs to be debated. We look forward in the Senate to any ideas that our colleagues in the House have, and at the same time we highly respect their views and we look forward to the debate. However, I don't really believe that that issue is going to be one that would pass the Senate. I think that it's incredibly important for those individuals who are attorneys who give up a practice of law and clients to be on the bench, and then if they were to have a term limit of 12 years, something to that effect, or 18 years, whatever it is, the fact of it is that it would subject them to a tremendous burden. We won't get the best and the brightest if we were to do that. And so I do look forward to a debate and a discussion with our colleagues, and we respect their opinions very highly. At the same time, I personally would have a very difficult time with that. And so I think that based upon where I was in the last couple of years as the chair of the Rules Committee in the Senate, I think that issue was not one that was the one that I thought would be beneficial to the state of Florida. And so I guess the answer to your question is I'm sure there will be debate. I don't know that it'll be passed.
So that may be an opportunity we never get, potentially. Okay, let me do this. We're getting near sort of the end of time, and I'd like to do some things, but let me ask all three of you, beginning Coach with you. Obviously, this was a good session, ended on time, met the needs of the state, lots of innovative policies. We're going to see the same thing in 2017?
I think so.
David?
Absolutely.
I hope so, yeah.
Okay. All right, let me do this. We have 4 or 5 minutes left, and are there any questions from the audience? You all can't be this easy. Yes, sir.
What's the nature of the second solar energy thing going on the ballot?
Pete and I were hoping you weren't going to ask that question. I know the one we passed in the legislature.
I have
don't
no
know the other.
clients in this debate, but I will tell you this. It strikes me as interesting that there is about $8 million that have been invested by the power companies to get it on the ballot initially. And of course, we're in a campaign season where all of the dollars in the campaign process are being reported, and there was another, was it $4 million yesterday that was moved by one of the power companies, I think Duke Power Company. If you look at it in some detail, what it does is it puts into the Constitution in a very structured way so that the legislature basically can't deal with it. The solar policy for Florida that I think probably is very beneficial to the current regulated power companies and would limit legislative flexibility to try and incentivize that. So, and again, I think you're going to hear a lot about that. The second one, before it's all said and done, the one that's on the August 30th ballot, I have not seen any opposition to. Carrie, Martha, anybody no opposition to the one that Mike shared with us? The other one, I think you'll see, we'll get a lot of debate and have some controversy about it. As neutral as I could walk the line, that's about as good as I could do. Anybody else?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, Craig.
I was just talking about water, and I've got friends that have waterfront property on the East Coast, and the algae this year.
The algae bloom.
Yeah, is that going to be something that I understand it's a very complex problem, and I'm just curious. Do you think it's going to be something rise up to the legislature?
Pete,
Let me, I'm going to repeat it for everybody's benefit. The question is, we have this, which has gotten national attention, the terrible algae bloom in the Indian River Lagoon on the East Coast, and we actually are seeing some of that now on the West Coast. And the question is, what is being done about it, what can be done about it? And David, you actually touched on some of this in the very first question, but refocus that in response to Craig's comments and question.
Sure. It's a major issue, of course, and let me explain to you how a lot of it's happening. And I wrote an article that was published in the Orlando Sentinel about a week ago as a special to the Sentinel. And it goes into detail exactly as to why we are where we are. There was a time 100 years ago where water and particularly the Everglades was an enemy. Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, who ran for governor in 1904, ran on the premise that they were going to get rid of that darned swamp down there. And as a matter of fact, we have to understand how we got where we are. In 1926 and 1928, there was a big hurricane, two big hurricanes that came through Florida. And Florida reached out after 3,000 residents were killed, and it was ugly. It was ugly. They reached out to the federal government and asked for help. And when the federal government comes in and helps, in this case, it's with the Corps of Engineers. And the idea was to go ahead and build a dike on the southern edge of Lake Okeechobee. Used to be that Lake Okeechobee, anytime that there was a lot of rain, particularly during the rainy season, would flood and just create what's called the River of Grass. And it was, they thought it was ugly. They really thought it was ugly, and it was not what we wanted, and it was not part of development, and it was not part of where the future of Florida was. And people wouldn't move here if all there was everything south of Lake Okeechobee was a big river of grass. And so the end result is that the Corps of Engineers built this big dike, the Herbert Hoover dike, 40 feet high, and the fact of it is it started holding the water in Lake Okeechobee, and it created a large lake that would not release because everything was for the purpose of development. And so the end result of it is, I know this is a long answer, but the end result is, Craig and all of you, is that the this 14.5 to 18 foot of water on this 372 square mile lake created a cauldron in which all the pollution, particularly the phosphates from the south, and no longer are the phosphates coming from the south. Only 5% of the phosphates and the pollution into Lake Okeechobee is coming from the south, where the sugar plantations are, whatever you want to call them, farms. The fact of it is it's coming from the north. It's coming from the Lake Kissimmee area. And so what happens is, the Lake Kissimmee or Lake Kissimmee River. And so what happened is that in its inimitable style, the Corps of Engineers hasn't repaired that dike in 75 years. And the end result of it is it keeps discharging water when in fact they're in preparation for the rainy seasons so that they can protect all of the people who are south and west of the lake. And so they keep discharging this water that has high amounts of phosphates in it, and also it's fresh water. And that has literally destroyed the Caloosahatchee River and its estuary to the west, and the St. Lucie to the east and its estuary. And the result of it is that this has gone on for 50 or 60 years. There just hadn't been so many people living close to them. In 2009, 2010, private citizens sued the Corps of Engineers, alleging that there had been a taking of their property as a result of the Corps' continuous violation of their property rights. And you know what the defense was? The defense by the Corps of Engineers was, hey, we've been doing this for 50 years, 60 years, and by the way, let me show you all of these newspaper articles that existed back 50 years ago condemning our conduct for what we've been doing. And we've been doing it so the statute of limitations is run, so there's nothing you can do about it. That's true. That's true. And the end result was that was affirmed on the Court of Appeals because the trial court, looking at it, said, you know what? This is a tragedy, what the Corps of Engineers is doing. But there's nothing we can do about it. The statute of limitations is run. The end result of it is that there is a solution because the Corps of Engineers only does this by virtue of the permission granted by the state of Florida. This is not a situation in which there is a supremacy clause in effect that says that they can control this. We actually control it. I am going to sponsor legislation that is going to demand that the Corps of Engineers stop discharging that water into these two rivers, and that they fix the dike, which they acknowledge that they should have done many, many years ago. You may see that in fact, if the Corps refuses to do that, that there will be sanctions against them. And so the answer to it is it can be done, it will be done, but you got to do first things first. And the first thing that we've got to do is fix the dike so that, if you want to talk about a reservoir for this water, the best reservoir is 1 foot of the large lake,
Water
372 square miles. That ends up being approximately, I'd say, almost 500 500,000 feet acres of water storage, more than we've ever had. What we need to have to get this started to solve this so that there will not be the discharges that have continually been made by the Corps of Engineers, and we can fix this problem. We can fix it now.
Did I? Yes, ma'am, and then I got a trivia question for Simmons.
Okay, considering we have the highest elderly population in all 50 states, can you tell us if for the 2017 session or in the future, is there any working committee working to incentivize the purchase of LTC or long-term care insurance so that we don't bankrupt the Medicaid system? And so many elderly are jumping on that Medicaid bandwagon to preserve the family assets. Other states have done it successfully, and considering we have the highest elderly population, I was wondering, do we have any working committees on that to try to incentivize and
Not a
save
select
Medicaid?
committee, but you go ahead. You got it.
I can tell you that on August the 26th, the Chamber of Commerce, and I see that Robert is here, and I also see that Mike Ketchum is here, the Central Florida the partnership is going to have a health symposium that is going to deal with a lot of this. And as a matter of fact, Representative Miller and I are going to be there, and we intend to have a dialogue on how we can solve many of these issues. And so we look forward to the debate on this and dealing with just what you're talking about, and that is a method to make this affordable for the state of Florida, as well as for assuring that the elderly are taken care of when they need to be.
If you want to come to the symposium, I think Michael and Robert would love to have you too. It should be a really lively. The purpose of the debate is exactly what Senator Simmons says. We're trying to look at all options and look at best practices for other states too. So.
And I would make this observation. It is, as a matter of custom, we don't know in reality what the new legislature will look like, or even what committees will be there, because that's all done on the organizational day. But in my experience, there's almost always in both houses a standing committee on insurance. So I would expect those to be back again, and these three gentlemen would be there to work on that. Okay, here's my trivia question. You mentioned Governor Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte. And I believe that you served with one of his great-great-grandsons, and I want you to tell me who that is.
Your Chief Financial Officer today, Jeff Atwater.
Wait, hold on a second. I thought you served with Napoleon Bonaparte.
Okay, I think we're getting near the end, and I want to do this, if you would, with me. Representative Plasencia, Senator Simmons, Representative Miller have been wonderful. On the ballot on August 30th, got to remember that. November. Help join me in thanking them for their participation today. I think on a motion by Karen Keene, we now stand adjourned, because there are good things in the back of the room, and I'm hoping our guests will be, I know Coach has a prior engagement, but we'll be able to stay for just a little bit. Hopefully you'll be able to talk with our guests individually. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.